so many associated product that goes into the Christmas tree. So if they don't get that Christmas tree, we lose the sales of the entire package.
This is Beyond the Box, integrated logistics from the inside out.
Hello and welcome to Beyond the Box. I'm Ellen Hoffman.
And I'm Christopher Meinert.
So in this episode, we're talking about supply chains and peak season. The glorious time of year that includes Black Friday, Diwali, Thanksgiving, Christmas, and so on. We're going to unpack trends, challenges, surprises.
Yes, and at the start of this episode, you heard the voice of Deepak Menon. He's the head of international supply chain at Kmart, a retailer in Australia, which I must admit I have never set foot in. But you have, right?
I sure have. Australia is my adopted homeland, and Kmart is huge there. You can think about it as a massive discount department store, or 320 plus massive discount department stores. I think it's fair to say that most Aussies will pop into Kmart at least once during the festive season. And if you were in Australia, you probably would too. I mean, what are your shopping habits like at this time of year?
Well, I have to admit, I tend to forget about gifts until the 23rd of December. And that's when I decide that everyone in my family would benefit from a new set of windshield wiper blades.
Very practical, not so easy to re-gift.
I know.
Well, I'm almost sure you could find your wiper blades in Kmart for cheap, as well as a pumpkin costume for your dog, the indispensable gold look platter for your sweet treats, the end of year gift for your kids' teachers, all the quote-unquote essentials.
That does sound essential. No surprise then that peak season is super important for Kmart. And as Deepak Menon said, it's not only the Christmas tree, but it's all the other stuff that we as consumers also put into the basket.
Yeah, and it's not just Kmart. Some businesses make up to 70% of their annual profits at this time.
And it used to be that August to November were the key months for supply chain planning. That was when businesses got their shelves stocked for the holiday season.
But as with everything to do with logistics and supply chains these days, it's complicated. And this year and the last few years have not looked like the others.
Right. And Deepak Menon, he can set the scene for us in terms of the challenges around preparing for peak season.
Challenge is always to manage the peaks and valleys in the product flow. So we must produce more upfront in most of the cases and buffer it at the different nodes of the supply chain and then trickle it slowly towards the destination to avoid any congestions at the destination. So that means the challenge basically comes down to space for buffering at the warehouse or getting the space in the ships or resources at the origin to process these volume, to manufacture these products at the manufacturing lines. So it's about short-term and long-term planning of both inventory and the flow of products throughout the supply chain. So what we have made significant process within Kmart is to bring up digital tools that will help us in this inventory planning and flow optimization. So in the last 14 months, we have made significant progress in these tools. So we are trying to come up with the tools that can spit out plans with up to about 95% accuracy. Now that definitely improves our space planning within the warehouse. And also we have a tool that looks into the container forecasting, which tells us precisely 2 months out how much of space that we need exactly in each ship. Now, all this helps us to pack and utilize our warehouse accurately, resource planning in the warehouse, resource planning and space planning within the ships so that we can stack the ship, flow the products, and then at the end, it all leads into high availability at the store.
So preparing for peak season is really a balancing act that takes a lot of careful planning and modern digital tools.
I can imagine that's important as ever because, as I mentioned, supply chains these days are super complex and there are a bunch of moving parts to factor in. Plus, as consumers, our buying behaviours and expectations have changed a lot.
Yeah, these days, anyone that has the means expects to be able to get what they want pretty much as soon as they want it.
And that can be the latest sneakers, smartwatch, but at this time of year, food is also really important. You can't have Christmas in Australia without lemons for the seafood. In the United States, they need those pecans for Thanksgiving.
Marek Schulz, he can tell us more about that. He is the Chief Operating Officer for Citronex, which is a fruit and vegetable grower and importer based in Poland. I spoke to Marek Schulz at the Fruit Attraction Fair in Madrid recently.
Peak season is always at the time when there is not so many other fruits available. So why the bananas are so good product in the winter time? Because we don't have so much other choices. So when the people go to the supermarket, they go for a shopping, of course they will find some mandarins, some oranges, but apart of this there is not so much other products that they can choose. And then if the same customer is going to the same supermarket but in June, July or August, there is a full range of the other products they can choose, and then they have to see them, and then they will notice that the bananas are not number one anymore.
Wow, that's a real 10,000 spoons when all you need is a knife situation, or 10,000 bananas when all you need is a mango.
Absolutely, and nice one with the Alanis Morissette reference. But I think that this is a really interesting point. How peak season in some cases isn't created by a demand, but by supply or lack of supply.
Right, and the internet adds a whole other dimension to that. Do you want to have a guess as to what percentage of consumers do their peak season shopping online?
I think that's hard, because for something like Black Friday, I imagine it's very high, whereas for Christmas somewhat lower. So I would say around 65%.
Yeah, it's a pretty good guess, but 80% of
Wow.
consumers do some of their peak season shopping online. And then 25%, so 1 in 4 people, they do all their shopping online. So that's one curveball, right? Because you could be buying anything at any time. It's not just what you see on shelves once the decorations are up.
And there are a bunch of other factors making peak season and the supply chains powering peak season look really different. Now, more than ever, businesses need to be ready for anything. And when you dive through different forecasts about peak season, the conclusion is essentially it's very volatile and we don't know what is going to happen.
If you'll allow me another musical reference, one
Sure.
that you might find a little bit cliche, but the times, they are a-changing.
Bob Dylan. Nice one.
Thanks. And for more on how they are a-changing, here's Joanna Hines, who is the head of retail at Maersk.
If we look back at the COVID side and on the supply side, right, planning went out of the window because suddenly we couldn't really get the goods anymore because nobody was allowed to produce. On the demand side, same thing. Suddenly nobody could go into a shop anymore. But now more recently, we've seen all these disruptions as well as the inflation and the price increases, which has kind of kept people away from stores. So the consumers are not following the patterns we're usually used to. So if I look at the most recent peak from an international standpoint where we are, it has been a lot smaller and it has been a lot earlier than what we would usually see, because people had either a lot of inventory still in their warehouses, which they needed to sell off, especially in commodities like durable goods, furniture, home improvement, this type of stuff. And or they were ordering very cautiously, but a little bit earlier to just not be caught in the middle of not having anything on the shelves, but not having too much on the shelves. Because planning is based on your experiences of the past, right? Very few retailers are able to do their international planning on the immediate demand impulses from a shop. That has all gone out the window. So now everybody's figuring out how to do this.
So, Joanna Hines is actually touching on a lot of themes we covered in episode 1 of the podcast. There have been massive changes in supply chains these past few years and a lot more uncertainty, which of course you can offset to an extent. To bring it back to peak seasons, I think this is summed up really nicely by that logistics management survey you found.
Yeah, of the supply chain stakeholders surveyed, 35% said peak seasons are now more active, 35% said less active, and 30% said things will stay the same.
One third. I think that's the definition of an each way bet.
And I think this is a really good time to hear from Martin Christopher. He's Emeritus Professor of Marketing and Logistics at Cranfield School of Management in the UK.
And no one knows supply chains like Martin Christopher.
No.
He has an impressive 40 years experience up his sleeve.
I have heard him referred to as the godfather of logistics.
I love that.
Yeah, and he's famous for pioneering this idea that it's not companies that compete, it's supply chains.
So if we take, Ford and General Motors, they'll often have the same suppliers supplying both of them. for many of their products. So it's not as if the supply chain is unique, but what is unique is the quality of the relationships that Ford have with their suppliers and that General Motors have with their suppliers. And it's how we manage those relationships that gives us that edge. So this, I think, is what it's really about. It's about how we build partnerships and how we ensure that we've actually got mutually beneficial arrangements. And it doesn't happen by itself. It requires, really proactive leadership, a whole change of mindsets. You don't want to keep your partners at arm's length anymore. We're going to bring them in, basically. And it also means a willingness to share information. We're all singing to the same song sheet. And this, I think, is what really makes it possible to cope with, be it seasonality, be it disruptions, or whatever, because we're much more closely connected and better able to work across those boundaries. So I think that's basically the fundamental thing. It's about how we manage those relationships.
Partnerships matter.
So the big question for businesses is, how exactly do you build a great partnership? Because they do need to be great.
And this is something I also spoke to Mark Schultz from Citronex about.
It's a very interesting question, because when you talk to the producers, they are in trouble every summertime. But then if you help them and if you don't stop loading, or you just decrease as less as possible, they will really appreciate, and they will give you the bananas at the time when you really want them. So, for example, we are treating the producers very, very well also in the summertime, because we have plenty of customers that we can do some promos, etc. Then they really appreciate that, and they give me back that volume. For example, they give me the hand in the wintertime when I really need to have it. Yeah? So normally they have so many customers happy to buy their bananas in the winter. So they can say, sorry, but we don't have anything available. But then I said, guys, but we are in the good time and in the bad time. I help you in the summer, so you help me in the winter. So that's more or less kind of partnership that we have also with the producers, same like we have with the logistic providers.
So a business with a good partner can get warehousing space when they need it quickly. They can find an alternative route in the event of a disruption, and so on and so forth.
So step 1 for a smooth peak planning season, ensure you're working with good supply chain partners.
And step 2, potentially not a surprise to anyone who has listened to previous episodes, is related to digitalization, those modern digital tools that you mentioned earlier on. Joanna Hines from Maersk also had some insights on this. Let's hear what she had to say.
What we have available now in terms of digital tools and the data we are collecting is a lot more than we had still a few years ago. So I think anybody who has invested heavily in analytics and maybe also even in generative AI and projections make use of it, right? Because the more unpredictable currently some of the environment elements are, the shorter the cycles we need to use to actually do the forecasting. And I know from many retailers that they're investing in those type of digital tools to make sure they have more data elements available, which are also at shorter cycles to actually determine how much stock they should be ordering for what type of items from where, so that they can actually better predict what is needed and in what place.
Back to the digital tools like Deepak Menon from Kmart mentioned in the beginning.
Exactly. The key to visibility, predictability, all the good stuff, especially in this day and age where peak seasons are all over the place.
In other words, when we talk about supply chain planning, we need a bit of a reframe. As Martin Christopher summarizes, the seasonal differences, they are evening out.
We create havoc in supply chains through promotions and things like that. But they're self-inflicted, whereas well, I suppose you could say Christmas is self-inflicted, but it's predictable. We know it's coming, and like Black Friday, we know it's coming. It may well disrupt our supply chains to an extent that the spikes create significant pressures on capacity. Of course they do, but in other sectors too. I mean, as you know, we're just talking about fruit and vegetable, where clearly again. There are seasons, there are growing seasons, but there are also seasons in terms of customer demand. Although what we're tending to see there, again, I think is partly through globalization, is things have become a bit less seasonal in a sense, that there is a year-round supply capability. A great example would be blueberries, which until about 15 years ago, I don't think anybody in Britain had eaten a blueberry. I may be wrong, but and now everybody eats them every day, all year round. And you look on the pack, where have they come from? Well, they've come from everywhere. So I think what we're really saying here is that one of the things that's enabled us to cope with seasonality is actually having a much more, well, again, it's the word is agile, supply chain capability. We can do things now which we weren't able to do before.
So every day is Christmas. That's what I'm hearing.
Right. In that case, my friends and family, they can look forward to new wiper blades every day.
That is too sad a note to leave on.
I know.
Instead, could you summarize what we've learned today?
Well, first and foremost, that peak seasons look a bit different these days. It is in part a time where we as consumers create a big demand for lemons, decorations.
Wiper blades.
Sure.
But it's not time boxed like it used to be, so a robust and flexible supply chain matters more than ever.
Right. And good partnerships and agility can give a business the edge. As the godfather of logistics, Martin Christopher, said, it's not companies that compete, it's supply chains.
And finally, don't underestimate the power of digital tools. And, in short, get your supply chain ready for anything. And that will serve a business for any season. Thanks for listening to this episode of Beyond the Box.
A special thanks to the team behind the scenes, including this episode's producer, Gyrid Cecilia Ross.
We'll be back with a new episode very soon. In the meantime, please rate, subscribe, and share the podcast wherever you listen.
Until next time.